The medical examiner suddenly resigned when I brought the civil suits.
Hi, welcome back to Let Me Ask You Something, the weekly podcast where I, MD Pitman, talk to everyday ordinary people about something extraordinary in their lives. Now, this week I talked to Jeffrey Deskovic. He had a pretty extraordinary experience when he was a 16 and 17-year-old kid. He was convicted of murder, and 16 years later, after his conviction when he was 17, it was overturned because the person who committed that crime was in prison. And so we talked to him about this experience. There's a documentary on Netflix about his conviction and his experience, and we go through what this did to him and what he's doing now. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Jeffrey Deskovic.
All right, and we are live with episode 9 in season 2 of Let Me Ask You Something, the podcast where I ask everyday people something about that was something extraordinary in their lives. This week we have Jeff I'm going to mispronounce your name, Deskovic? Deskovic. All right. I was way off. Well, Jeff had been in prison for 16 years, convicted as a teenager for a crime he did not commit, and was proven so after 16 years. So let me ask you something, Jeff. What was it like to be in prison as a 16, 17-year-old?
Yeah, I was arrested when I was 16. I got bailed out, and then I turned 17, and the trial started shortly thereafter, which I lost. So I was incarcerated from age 17 to 32. What was it like? Unlike anything at all in any other type of human experience, I would describe it as a nonstop obstacle course featuring the guards, the prisoners, and the other civilians as obstacles to the main goal, which was to overturn the conviction and get the hell out of there. It was not simply the loss of freedom, but it was terrible conditions as well. And then beyond the physical aspect of things, I had to keep fighting off feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. So it was mental and psychological as much as it was physical.
But you were probably significantly younger than the rest of the population there.
That is completely correct, because I had been charged as an adult, tried as an adult, sentenced as an adult. And when that happens, they therefore send you to an adult maximum security prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was significantly younger. So I think that it was even more difficult for me to try to adjust to the prison walls and prison life. And certainly it was very dangerous. I mean, there were a lot of people guilty of serious violent crimes. You were in the prison. These were fully formed adults, 25 to 32. And here I'm a barely turned 17 years old. And on top of that, I'm wrongfully convicted of a sex offense along with the murder. So, there's a vigilante mentality where people have been convicted of sex offenses. So I have this bullseye on my back. So I was always concerned that people might discover what I was incarcerated for.
Did anything like that happen? Was there any issues like that arose?
Yeah, there were some issues that arose like that. A few times I was physically assaulted. One time I, nearly lost my life. So, yeah, that did happen. I think the last time it happened was in 1997, and by that point I was, around 23, 24 years old, and I defended myself. I got a little bit of a reputation. In fact, that earned me my first and only trip to the solitary confinement. And, and so when I came back out, that did earn a little bit of a reputation. So when I was transferred to a different prison, when other people got transferred there from that other facility, they went out of their way to make sure that I knew that they were into minding their own business and not talking about people's cases and crimes. And they didn't want me to think that they were going to cause me any trouble. So I think in the long run, that was worth it. Although, solitary confinement was a terrible experience. And, I really got the worst end of things anyway, even though I did what I did. But I think the reputation of it, but it was worth it, I guess, on the overall.
So who was Angela Coria? What was her relationship to you?
Yeah, Angela Correa was a classmate in Peekskill High School. She was in one of my classes as a freshman, two as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was really the extent of it. I mean, we were not even on a high buy basis.
Okay. But what made prosecutors and police think that you were the guy that sexually assaulted and killed her?
Well, they interviewed a lot of students from the school, and some of the kids told the police they might want to talk to me. That because I was quiet and to myself. And the second thing was that, I was a sensitive teenager and this was my real first brush with death. And so I did have an emotional reaction. And the police thought that that was suspicious. Why would you have an emotional reaction over the death of somebody that you barely knew? But then, I mean, I don't think that's much of a reason to be suspicious, but that was their line of reasoning. I mean, I want to mention for context that this affected many people in the community emotionally, to the point that free mental health services were set up throughout the whole city of Peekskill that help people process what had happened. Third thing was they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that. So it was a type of reinforcing factor. So that was how I got on the police radar. That was how the police came to look at me as a suspect.
But when they didn't have any evidence, I mean, there was I mean, from what I've read up on, there was a lot of issues with the case that were eventually brought out during the overturning of this conviction. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they didn't have any evidence against me, and so eventually they tricked me into agreeing to take a polygraph test. They for about 6 weeks they pretended like they needed my help to solve the crime, and so they would talk to me as a suspect, and they pushed too hard. I'd become frightened and want to get away from them. And then Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was something that they pushed, and so they used that to keep me in contact with them and keep me off balance. They got me to agree to take a polygraph test eventually because they said they had some new information that they wanted to share with me, and if I passed the polygraph, then they could do that. So as far as the polygraph, they transported me from Peekskill in Westchester County. They drove me 40 minutes away by car across county lines to this polygraphist who carried out this get the confession procedure, in which he interrogated me for 6.5 to 7 hours after first wiring me up with coffee and then engaging in third-degree scare tactics like invading my personal space, raising his voice at me, asking me the same questions over and over again, keeping that up for 6.5 to 7 hours, having the cop who was pretending to be my friend then eventually, convey a threat and false promise. He said that the cops are going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do this any longer. You have to help yourself. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. Being young, frightened, naive, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, I was just concerned with my own safety in the moment. And so I made up a story based on the information that they had given me in the course of the interrogation. By the time it was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor into a fetal position, crying uncontrollably.
Now, where were your parents? Where were an attorney? I mean, 6.5, 7 hours, that's just insane.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. In terms of where my parents were, an attorney, I mean, if you're 16 years old, then you're considered to be an adult for the purpose of being able to speak to the police without parental permission or without an attorney being present.
Did you ask for an attorney?
I did not, no.
Okay.
But I mean, but the reason I didn't was twofold. Firstly, I was misguided as to the purpose of the polygraph. I thought I was there to help the police. I didn't understand that I was a suspect in a murder and rape. That was one thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing is then once they started with their third degree tactics, I mean, I didn't think that I could ask for an attorney. That thought never crossed my mind. They just, kind of frightened me out of my mind.
So how did you get out of prison? What I guess how did you appeal? What did you do to get this looked at?
Yeah, so Well, I mean, I did lose 7 appeals. I mean, I used to go to the law library and learn the law, and I would write letters looking for my appeals were over. The only way back into court is if you could find some new evidence. So I didn't have any money to hire an attorney or an investigator. So I started this letter writing campaign, trying to find somebody who'd take my case for free. Eventually, one of the letters set in motion a chain of events that culminated with my getting representation from the Innocence Project, so they agreed to represent me. Second thing was that the district attorney that fought all of my appeals, 7 of them, and blocked me from getting further testing. She left office, and her successor was willing to let me get the testing. And the third thing is we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the DNA data bank. So they took the crime scene DNA, which already hadn't matched me from before the trial, and they put it in the data bank. And it matched the actual perpetrator, whose DNA was in the data bank because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed a second victim 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case.
So that was the new evidence that came up, or was that part of the new evidence?
Oh, that was the new evidence.
That was the new evidence. Okay.
Well, he also confessed when the DNA matched him. He also confessed to the crime, confronted with that. So those two things together were the evidence.
Okay. I did that.
Oh, yeah.
So you've been since you've been out since 2006.
Yeah.
You've been really an advocate for criminal justice reform. I got a 3-part question here. What have you changed? What are you currently changing? And what still needs to be changed? So they're kind of a past, present, and future question then.
Understood. And just for context, the audience will know I did criminal justice reform as an individual advocate for my first 5 years. I was speaking across the country. I was writing letters I was writing as a columnist. I was regularly meeting with elected officials, and I was doing media interviews. And after 5 years, I was financially compensated, so I started a nonprofit organization, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. I got a master's degree in criminal justice. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction cause and reforms, and I'm also an attorney as well. So in terms of what we already have passed, so the foundation helped pass 3 laws. So DNA database expansion, which meant that so when people were convicted of various misdemeanor offenses, they would be required to give a DNA sample, which would be put into the data bank, so that when DNA was put into the data bank looking for a perpetrator, the chances of matching the actual person would be increased, like what happened for my case. So that's what DNA database expansion is. Videotaping interrogations. So my interrogation was not videotaped or audio taped, no signed confession. So the cops, when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of their testimony. So myself and other advocates, we managed to get the legislature in New York to pass a law mandating videotaping interrogations. We did identification reform. So misidentification is the leading cause of wrongful convictions in the DNA-proven wrongful convictions. So the best practices which have been established through social science experiments, some of them have been passed into law in New York State. Now, in terms of what other things that we've done, so I'm also an advisory board member of a bigger coalition group called It Could Happen to You, which the foundation is a part of. And so we were able to pass 6 additional laws pertaining to that. So, and I'm just trying to be quick and simple.
No, you're fine.
All right. So we helped pass the country's first commission on prosecutor conduct, so an independent oversight board that could investigate allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. So nothing like that existed. So we passed that. We passed a tweak of it. Then we had to repass it because the District Attorneys Association brought a lawsuit. They didn't want to have oversight. So the judge rejected their arguments, but did find that the law did have an error in it, which caused it to be declared unconstitutional. So we had to repass the statute, taking the judge's decision into account. So we did repass that. Yeah. Another thing we passed was discovery reform, which pertains to sharing information automatically between the defense and the prosecution. Okay, so we did that. And then also in Pennsylvania, as we do policy work in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. So in Pennsylvania, we passed a law which would give automatic expungement. So anyone who was previously anybody who was exonerated still had the crime on their rap sheet, which hindered them when it came to employment. So we helped pass a law making that automatic. So
Yeah, I
that's
know that there's been a thing where to remove the box or for
ban the box.
ban the box. Yes.
Yeah, that's a different policy issue that pertains to formerly incarcerated people not having to disclose their criminal record until after a job offer has been made in order to prevent discrimination based on.
Yeah.
But that's different. We're just saying people who are exonerated should not have to go through such a convoluted, complicated process that led people to still have a record on crimes that they were exonerated of.
Yeah.
So that's what we've already passed. So in terms of what we're working on now. So firstly, in New York, while we passed the commission where the picks are distributed amongst the governor, the chief judge, and various elected officials. So we're pushing them we've been asked to give a list of people that we would recommend to serve on it. So we're trying to get the picks made, and then we're trying to get a budget passed. So we're asking the New York State Legislature to allocate $3.5 million so that the commission would have paid staff, because without a budget, the commission is just on paper. So we're working on that in New York. Another thing in New York we're working on is in terms of videotaping interrogations. So the legislature mandated that the police videotape the interrogations. They made exceptions for sex offenses, drug cases, and certain types of homicide. So we're trying to get rid of the exceptions. We want the videotaping to happen in all situations.
Mm-hmm.
Working on parole reform also. In a nutshell, deserving candidates when they appear in front of the parole board, they should be released, right? If they can demonstrate their rehabilitation. Previously, what's been going on is anyone convicted of a violent crime would be almost automatically denied parole rather than the board assess whether someone's been rehabilitated or not.
Wow.
So we're trying to fix that. The companion, and that's called fair and timely parole. The other parole initiative is called elder parole. And so that's a proposition that says that if someone is 55 and they've also already served 15 years in prison, they would be guaranteed a parole board appearance, not a guaranteed release, but appearance. So that's in New York. In Pennsylvania, we are currently building support for exoneree compensation, meaning that Pennsylvania is one of 14 states that does not currently give compensation. So if I had been exonerated in Pennsylvania, the government would not owe me anything. So we're working on that, and then the oversight for prosecutors. In California, we are working on passing the oversight for prosecutors. We're trying to export that commission to other states.
It seems like this is a domino effect, really. I mean, what you're doing in New York, Pennsylvania, and California, I mean, this is setting up for what can be done in my state of Ohio, in Indiana, in the Midwest, in the South. I mean, is that kind of the goal?
Yes, that is the goal. Yes, that's absolutely the goal. Sure. I mean, we're just trying to build support for our campaigns, just on the financial aspect of it. So when we do pass in these other two states and we're able to raise more money, we definitely want to expand and go into other states.
And what you've been talking about, it seems unbelievable that some of this stuff is still being fought, like recording and videotaping of people in interrogations. You would think that would be done across the country.
Yeah, instinctively you would, especially if you knew that coerced false confessions have caused wrongful convictions in 25% of the cases. You would think that. Sure, you would think that independent oversight for prosecutors would go without saying across the country, considering they, every other profession is regulated. Even the judges have a commission that oversees them nationally, right? Just like, a lot of the things that are wrong with the system, like bad lawyering, not a sufficient budget for public defenders, and uneven playing field in terms of manpower and budget, comparing the public defender system versus the DA's office. Even a lot of the non-innocence justice reform issues, like, the aspects of parole reform we talked about. Those are not problems that plague New York in particular. Those are problems, nationally. Other things like solitary confinement, lack of college education in prison, the verbal abuse between the guards towards the prisoners. There's a whole ton of work that needs to be done that you would think that goes without saying, but unfortunately does not, and hence the need to do a bunch of work. But one thing that happened to me as a result of my doing the 16 years in prison prior to being proven innocent is that I have a purpose in life. I have a mission in life to, fight wrongful conviction, do the freeing people and the preventative work, and while fighting for broader justice reform. So I do have that inner peace and sense of purpose. And, I'm not an angry person. I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. And I can only do that if I'm not angry or bitter. And doing this advocacy work, I take that energy and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do. And that's my release valve.
So take me back to your 15 and 16-year-old self before this all happened. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, as a 16-year-old, I wanted to be an attorney. My mother had a personal injury attorney, and he was dressed well, had the attaché case and suit, and he appeared to be well compensated and well respected. So I did want to be an attorney. I did make that come true, albeit much later in life. But it wasn't to do wrongful conviction work, but I did want to do that based on that. Now, prior to being a teenager, I fantasized about being a cop when I grew up, and as it turned out, I mean, that was something that the police turned around on me, and when they tricked me, as I mentioned. But in a way, I've been able to do a little bit of work in that area also. So in this following limited way, I mean, in that the last 5 years, I've co-taught the morals and ethics class at a police academy in New Jersey with the new police recruits, and I have also served on the Peekskill Police Task Force Reform Group. So I was assigned to the policy committee where I worked with the then sitting police chief, a county police officer, retired detective, and I was able to get consensus with them about a bunch of improvements on procedure to improve policing. So I've been around it some in that way. So
what happened to the investigators that worked on your case, the prosecutors that worked on your case, the judge in the case? Whatever became of those?
Yeah, in a long, I think just to sum up, really nothing happened to them. The lieutenant became the Peekskill police chief in part based on what his role in solving the case in my case was. And then once I emerged and was exonerated and I brought civil suit, they still stayed with him as the police chief for the next 6 or 7 years. The lead detectives just retired. They still have their pension. The polygraphist, nothing happened to him. He retired. I mean, look, I guess the most that could be said would be, and everybody just retired. Nothing happened to them. The most that could be said was that the medical examiner suddenly resigned when I brought the civil suit. So he's not the Westchester County medical examiner anymore. And the trial prosecutor suddenly resigned 2 weeks before I emerged, and he ran to Florida. So, I mean, you have those indirect consequences. But no, I did bring civil suit. I didn't allow anyone to escape, but they're not the ones that paid the judgment. It was the municipalities and entities that they worked for rather than themselves personally.
Did you ever get an apology from anybody besides the court that exonerated you?
No, I did not. I mean, just again, the court that exonerated me apologized, the prosecutor in the courtroom and the DA, but they were not the people originally involved in my case. The only other person that apologized, I mean, would be the actual perpetrator. I mean, he apologized, the others didn't, so it was better than them on that one. It was kind of ironic, right? But but he wrapped his promise around a lie, and he claimed that had he known that I was incarcerated for his crime, that he would have come forward sooner.
No, he wouldn't.
I don't believe that, and I don't believe that.
No, he wouldn't.
Exactly right. I mean,
so I wanted to get with this. You have a documentary coming out that is about your case, your life here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It's called Conviction, and actually it's come out already. It's called Conviction, and it's on Netflix. And it is about my advocacy work and my life post-exoneration. And in that way, it differs from other documentaries that are about wrongful conviction cases in that it's not a deep dive into my case. It is just about my...
Kind of like the after effects. Oh, you froze there a little bit.
What?
Oh,
right,
sorry, Jeff. Jeff, you froze there a little bit. There we go.
Okay. How about now?
We're back.
Yeah. So, all right. So it does differ in that way. But what I'm most proud of with the documentary short is that I did use the platform that I was given to call some attention to a lot of disturbing things that I was subjected to and that I witnessed while I was wrongfully imprisoned.
Yeah.
But I just want to quickly mention that Conviction has been featured in 14 different film festivals. It's won 3 awards. There is a longer version that'll be an hour and a half that'll get into more of the legal aspects that the director and producer and I are shooting for it to be done within a year.
So how many people are wrongfully convicted? I mean, I would imagine that it's a low number, but how many people are actually convicted that shouldn't be?
Yeah. All right. So you could only count the people that are exonerated. You can't count the people who are wrongfully convicted.
Yeah.
So
everybody's innocent, right? Just
somewhat,
asking.
well, somewhat of a misnomer, though. I mean, in certain ways, claiming you're innocent while incarcerated, can work against you. I mean, certainly as far as going to the parole board or not taking the sex offender training program. And plus, I mean, innocence is not really something that's typically talked about in the prison out of the concern that what if the case is overturned, but then you have to go back to trial and then somebody will take what you've told them and then twist it around and claim you had made to get out of prison early. So having said that, look, there's been 19 people that have been exonerated either before me or after me that I did time with in the course of my 16 years. Every time that there's a junk science that's exposed or rogue detective or rogue forensic scientist, I mean, dozens and, if not more cases. I mean, in New York, for example, there was one retired detective, Scarcella, that there's been like 14, 15 exonerations just on cases that he made the arrest alone.
Wow, because I would imagine I just had the thought of you would have to relook at every case that detective or police department did.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. The same thing like in Illinois, they had mass exoneration day twice there, where there's this one Detective Guerra and his other partners. One day 18 people that they framed were exonerated in one day. Another day was 15. As far as forensic scientists, if you will look at the documentary How to Fix a Drug Scandal, several thousand cases from disgraced former that was a forensic scientist, Annie Duquesne, those cases were dismissed. So I guess I'm saying that and plus there's a Wayne State University study that estimates that 10,000 people are wrongfully convicted each year. So I personally think that the percentage of the population is between 15 to 20%. Now that's my guess. I'm kind of on an island on that. Right? Other people
you got a little bit of bias history there.
well, what I mean by that is other individuals, other experts in the field, they estimate 5% or 2.5%, 1 or half. I think that's low. The anecdotal evidence seems to be flowing my way. It seems like there's 2 or 3 exonerations every week. But yeah, it's but remember, this has been going on for a really long time. DNA testing kind of opened the window into this whole world of wrongful conviction and studying what's caused it that really didn't exist before DNA was originally created and started being utilized back in 87.
Right. Well,
so I think it's a much higher percentage than what all of us realize. It's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah. So, Jeff, is there anything else you'd like to say or mention, or any parting words? I think we're getting close to our half-hour time frame. Anything you'd like to say or mention?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. That, while I've given the foundation a running start, I mean, we do want to increase our capacity as far as how many cases we can work on and how many states we can do policy work on. So we do have a crowdfunding page on the website Patreon. So imagine if 25,000 people were willing to sacrifice $3 to $5 on a recurring monthly basis or some other amount they could afford. The money that would be there cumulatively, we could free more people. We have 10 cases active now, but there's another 7 that we haven't been able to process. There's about 300 other applications that we haven't been able to process either. So we definitely need some public support for this really important work. So I guess that would be a parting thought. And look, this really could happen to you, and this is about accuracy and justice rather than an anti-police or anti-prosecutor campaign.
All right, wonderful. That was fantastic. Thank you very much for being on my podcast this week.
Thank you very much for having me.